This is the backpack I usually bring. And then my megaphone. This is the second one. The first one, I had a lot cooler stickers on. This is a windmill that we use for the flashlights, so they really don't like this. But, you know, the Antifa terrorist backpack.
This is the ICE facility in South Portland. For much of 2025, demonstrators gathered here, protesting the president's immigration crackdown as it spread across the Pacific Northwest and the country. The building sits on a corner city block, more than a mile from downtown. Some protests were quiet.
Look at this person clowning around.
Others escalated into clashes. All while Trump described the city like this.
It's like living in hell.
Portland, Oregon, where it looks like a war zone.
And threatened to send federal troops.
There's no mistaking that it's not a war zone, you know.
We're taking a look at President Trump's ongoing immigration crackdown. In this first part, how the protests grew into a test of federal power.
Hey, we'll get right back to the video. I just want to let you know OPB is an independent journalism organization. We are community supported, we're nonprofit. We serve Oregon, Southwest Washington, and the broader region. We've been covering this story for months, reporting day and night, trying to make sense of this important news moment. That's only possible thanks to our amazing members and supporters. Come join us at opb.org. Let's get back to the story.
I think the story of these protests, you can just go back to Election Day. We had anticipated that there would be protests.
Portland made national headlines in 2016 when Trump was elected the first time. And there were historic protests in 2020 after George Floyd was murdered.
There were protesters down there ready to go, but they never quite had the numbers.
In the spring of 2025, the president's large-scale immigration enforcement campaign ramped up, following through on his central re-election promise.
We are delivering mass deportation, and it's happening very fast.
The basis for what we've seen in Portland with the clashes between law enforcement with protesters, the root of that are people that are very angry with what have felt like very aggressive tactics when it comes to immigration enforcement.
My name is from Cicero. They don't have a warrant. They didn't ask for one. They forcefully opened the door to Trump. It was locked.
In June, one thing the Trump administration was doing in Portland and in other cities was arresting people at immigration court itself. The Department of Homeland Security would have the list of people who were showing up to court that day and were making arrests at court, like right after hearings, right outside the building.
That was in the news and drew a lot of protests too. And then Trump took the extraordinary step of sending the federalized National Guard to Los Angeles.
Tear gas, flashbangs, angry crowds, and heavily armed and armored U.S. immigration and customs enforcement agents marked a volatile Friday in the heart of Los Angeles during a series of immigration sweeps.
Donald Trump, without consulting California law enforcement leaders, commandeered 2,000 of our state's National Guard members to deploy on our streets illegally and for no reason.
As a reporting team, we kind of knew it was a matter of time before we would start to see protesters taking their demonstrations to the doorstep of the ICE facility at the Portland waterfront. You would see the uses of force like chemical munitions, tear gas, pepper balls, flashbang-style grenades. All used as like dispersal tactics, but they're also what law enforcement would call like indiscriminate force.
In June, there was the No Kings protest, and that came at the same time the Trump administration was announcing that they were ramping up immigration enforcement. There was a lot of pressure to kind of step up efforts that had already felt pretty aggressive, I think, to a lot of folks. Those protests were really big.
In Portland, most demonstrators gathered downtown. After that march ended, some joined up with protesters outside the ICE building. It was the largest crowd to show up there since Trump returned to office.
And we know now from court records, too, that in that moment, federal law enforcement were saying that they were prepared to use lethal force on demonstrators that day.
That MPX is in his hands. He's right.
In court records, Homeland Security officials described injuries sustained during the protests.
Protests in Portland don't dissolve overnight. It was happening sort of like stubbornly, intermittently, but we can tell you just from firsthand experience that July and August were considerably quieter than what we saw in June. I think it's important to kind of set the stage there that there was this narrative struggle going on.
Even as things were calming down on the ground, the narrative that Portland was out of control was gaining momentum online. The city's reputation loomed large nationally.
Around September, President Donald Trump started really putting a microscope on Portland again.
What they've done to that place is it's like living in hell. They just burned the place down, and the shop owners, most of them have left, but the few shops that are open, they just use plywood and just like 3/4-inch plywood.
Either the Trump administration or sympathetic media, the narrative that they were trying to spin, that this was a war-ravaged community, on fire and violent and in need of federal intervention.
Some outlets were misrepresenting the situation on the ground, using footage from 2020 in news about 2025. In September, the focus on Portland amplified, and city officials got word that federal officers were flooding in.
On September 27th, that morning, the president put on social media that he was sending troops to Portland, calling the city war-ravaged, under attack from domestic terrorists, and authorizing what he said was full force if necessary, but didn't really say what he meant by that.
There is no insurrection, there is no threat to national security, and there is no need for military troops in our major city.
The state and the city of Portland filed a lawsuit challenging the legality of the deployment. They asked a federal judge to block the troops.
It's not that Oregon's governors have been resistant to using the National Guard for public safety when it's required it, and Kotek basically said as much. I would use them if I thought we needed them, and we simply don't need them. And communicating with the president himself, saying local law enforcement has us under control. Arrests have been made when we've had to make arrests. Other local leaders said we don't need this. And in fact, it may make the situation more dangerous.
City of Portland is about 145 square miles. This is one city block. And even the events that are happening down there do not rise to the level of attention that they are receiving.
Like he did in California, Trump wanted to take control of the National Guard and send them into a U.S. city. That's something that's only been done a handful of times.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military. Portland, Oregon, where it looks like a war zone. And I get a call from the liberal governor, "Sir, please don't come in. We don't need you." I said, well, unless they're playing false tapes, this looked like World War II.
The Trump administration said Portland was out of control, and local leaders weren't doing anything to stop it. Some people agreed.
There's a right to protest, but there's a difference between protesting and a difference between impeding and obstructing.
For a while, when the police weren't here in the beginning, it was like, you know, people were doing whatever they want out here. And if Trump wanted to send out the National Guard, I would welcome him to do that because it was very bad. Burning flags right in the, you know, on the sidewalk, you know, right next to a building, just things like that, you know, really anti-American behavior.
In late September, early October, we were starting to see agents that were being sent there that weren't there before. When they see someone in the crowd who steps on federal property, it won't be very long until you see federal law enforcement come out and try to detain that person. We've seen people get shoved who aren't doing hardly anything. We've seen many times when they've pepper sprayed somebody and then just walked away. Somebody who wasn't necessarily appearing to warrant that kind of reaction.
It was really early that night, maybe not even 9 o'clock. I was standing up at the front like usual, doing my thing, yelling with Finn. There's 2 DHS officers and then a 3rd DHS officer here. The 3rd guy comes through and I hear him go step back and I go, I'm exactly where you told me to be. And he goes, 1, 2, and then on the count of 3, he maces me and Finn.
We witnessed this female protester get maced in the face by a federal agent for unknown reasons. She had been yelling at agents, but we didn't see anything physical.
And I sit down and then I just scream. Because it's all in my throat and my mouth and going down into my stomach, and it burns so bad. And I just try to like scream it back out. And I stopped wearing PPE because it gotten really quiet. So I was just like, there's really no point of like wearing anything. I'll be okay. And then I got maced. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. I'm never gonna wear PPE again. And I'm just gonna keep on coming down here and see what else happens. Because if they're willing to target somebody with no PPE and a young woman, I mean, I look young. They knew exactly what they were doing. I'm just a girl out there just protesting, and anyone can do it. I'm not going to stop until people are treated like human beings. Yeah.
Trump stationed hundreds of troops outside of Portland, but a federal judge blocked their deployment.
For most of October, all of the litigation was focused on this thing called a temporary restraining order, and basically, blocking the National Guard from deploying to the building, from even being federalized under the president's control. We think the law's on our side, the city and the state argued. There's a lot of harm that could happen if the Guard is deployed.
Why are you escalating the situation? Why are you escalating things?
I arrived an hour or 2 after the judge had ruled temporarily to block the Trump administration from sending in the troops. That suddenly we started to see, just that one night in particular, very aggressive and strange tactics. It wasn't a particularly unique crowd at the time. Federal law enforcement, they started pushing protesters out. They would kind of push the crowds 10 yards away, stop, do nothing, let the crowd sort of loudly ask questions.
What are you doing?
Wonder what was going on, and then get pushed back 10 more yards. The tear gas was so thick you couldn't even see the pepper balls coming at you. You could only hear the loud rapid fire click. The whole time that this is going on, as we're getting pushed down the street, you could see videographers behind law enforcement. You could see drones kind of swooping overhead. I think we saw 2. At the time when we know that the narrative of the city was really in question, it was just very striking to see how much resources they were putting towards content creation in that particular night. It's an interesting question to think about tactics. If you listen to federal law enforcement when they testified about what they were seeing in the crowd, it was a lot of people wearing black, covering their faces, people with homemade shields, people in football pads. There's an image that opponents to the protests wanted to paint of, a battle-ready protester.
In October, flanked by cameras and influencers, DHS Secretary Kristi Noem visited the ICE building.
Noem arrived in Portland just hours ago to get an up-close look at the ICE facility on the city's
Days later, Noem led a White House roundtable on Antifa.
I was in Portland yesterday and had the chance to visit with the governor of Oregon and also the mayor. They're in town, and they are absolutely covering up the terrorism that is hitting their streets.
The Portland politicians are literally willing to sacrifice their own citizens just to appease these Antifa terrorists.
There's been a pretty irreverent tone in that crowd. One of the main images of the protests throughout the summer was a guy in a chicken suit who was there on at the driveway opposing ICE on a nightly basis. Somebody someday dressed up in an inflatable frog costume. You also started to see a lot of people in various other inflatables, and that became a story kind of in and of itself.
I don't know, it makes me feel like I'm happy to bop around, so yay. But it shows that we're peaceful.
Trump's impression of Portland is that it's this full of these rioters and people that want to burn things down. And so he expected that, he could generate a situation that's going to kind of trick people into taking the bait and burning it down and then getting footage of it and then saying, this is why we're sending the National Guard. It's a working strategy to keep the militarization out of Portland and to not empower ICE to go after our neighbors and to go after immigrants in our community, So silly as it is, it's very serious.
These questions of whether the protests were out of control domestic terrorism in need of military intervention, or an exercise of First Amendment rights.
We're going to have Portland police officers down here. We're going to be monitoring what's going on, just like we have been, and we're going to try to uphold First Amendment rights of everybody involved.
Would continue to play out in Portland and across the country. And those competing narratives would go on trial in late October. While protests outside the ICE building were holding steady, immigration enforcement was escalating. For many families, the consequences weren't debated or chanted in the streets. They arrived quietly at home.
Oh.
Good morning.
Good morning, Dad. Yeah.
Good morning. Yeah.
¿Qué hiciste?
No.
It was just their house.
Just home.
In the next episode, we turn from the protests to the communities living at the heart of the crackdown.
Hey, thanks for watching. We want to hear from you. Please just hit us up in the comments. These questions about the balance of federal, state, and local power and the role of the military on US soil are as old as these United States themselves. If you haven't seen Ken Burns' The American Revolution, you can learn more about the defining struggles that built our country. Stream it with OPB Passport at watch.opb.org or on the PBS app from your Roku or smart TV when you join as a sustaining member. We have thousands of hours of high-quality, factual documentary and news video available on the PBS app. All of this is only possible thanks to our amazing members and supporters. We really can't do this without you. In the next episode, we're going to turn away from the ICE building in Portland and look at how immigration enforcement is impacting real human beings across the state. If you want to know more about that, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss part 2.